When power corrupts and secrets surface, one guard's conscience becomes the catalyst for a scandal that will shake the very foundations of the Asterian royal palace. What started as a routine night shift for security guard Marcus Thompson, when he discovers a conversation that was never meant to be heard recorded on a tape that holds the power to destroy reputations and careers and expose the dark truth behind the golden facade of royalty. Part 1. Marcus Thompson adjusted his security badge as he walked through the dimly lit corridors of the Asterian royal palace. 23 years he had served as a palace guard, and never once had he questioned the loyalty that ran through his veins like blood. The marble floors echoed with each step of his polished boots, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Tonight felt different, though. Heavy with an unspoken tension that seemed to seep through the ornate walls. The palace after midnight was a different world entirely. Gone were the bustling servants, the clicking heels of dignitaries, and the constant hum of official business. In their place was an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant chiming of the grandfather clock in the main hall, and the occasional creak of ancient wooden beams settling in the cool night air. Marcus had grown to appreciate these quiet hours, when he could truly focus on his duties without the chaos of daytime protocols. As he rounded the corner toward the east wing, Marcus noticed something peculiar. Lady Catherine Blackwood, the Queen's closest advisor and confidant, was still in her office. The warm glow of lamplight spilled from beneath her door, casting a golden rectangle across the Persian rug in the hallway. This was unusual. Lady Catherine was known for her punctuality and strict adherence to schedules. She typically left the palace no later than 8 in the evening, always ensuring she maintained a proper work-life balance despite her demanding position. Marcus paused, his training kicking in. Any deviation from normal routine was worth noting, even something as seemingly innocent as someone working late. He pulled out his small notepad, the same one he had carried for over 2 decades, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hours of use. He jotted down the time, 12:47 a.m., and the observation, Lady Catherine still present, East Wing office. The sound of muffled voices drifted through the heavy oak door. Marcus frowned, checking his patrol sheet. According to the evening log, Lady Catherine should have been alone. No meetings were scheduled, and certainly no late-night appointments were permitted without proper security clearance. The voices grew slightly louder, and Marcus could distinguish 2 distinct speakers. Lady Catherine's refined accent was unmistakable, but the second voice was harder to place. Marcus faced a dilemma that would haunt him for months to come. Palace protocol dictated that he should announce his presence and ensure all personnel were accounted for. However, something in the tone of the conversation, the urgency and secrecy of it, made him hesitate. These were not the casual tones of colleagues working late on administrative matters. There was something charged in the air, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He positioned himself strategically near the door, not close enough to be accused of eavesdropping, but close enough to fulfill his security duties. The conversation inside continued, and gradually, fragments began to reach his ears. Words like arrangement, payment, and silence floated through the door like smoke, each one adding to his growing unease. Lady Catherine's voice carried a tone Marcus had never heard before, calculating, almost cold. "The transfer must happen tomorrow night," she was saying. "We cannot afford any delays. Too much depends on this remaining buried." The second voice, which Marcus now recognized as belonging to Lord Harrison Fitzwilliam, the Queen's private secretary, responded with obvious anxiety. "Are you certain this is the only way? If this ever comes to light, it will destroy everything we have worked for. The Queen trusts us implicitly, which is precisely why this must never reach her ears," Lady Catherine replied sharply. "What she doesn't know cannot hurt her, or us. The arrangement with the newspaper editor is solid. He understands the consequences of betrayal." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Whatever was happening behind that door, it involved deception at the highest levels of the royal household. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. As a man who had dedicated his life to protecting the royal family, the implications of what he was hearing shook him to his core. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Marcus maintaining his position while struggling with the weight of what he was learning. Details emerged about financial transactions, forged documents, and a carefully orchestrated cover-up that reached far beyond the palace walls. It became clear that Lady Catherine and Lord Fitzwilliam were involved in something that went against everything the royal family stood for. When the voices finally stopped, and he heard the scraping of chairs, Marcus quickly moved to a nearby alcove, hidden behind one of the large marble columns that supported the vaulted ceiling. He watched as Lord Fitzwilliam emerged first, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious distress. The man's hands shook as he straightened his tie, and his face was pale in the dim corridor lighting. Lady Catherine followed moments later, her expression unreadable but her movements sharp and purposeful. She locked her office door with unnecessary force, the sound echoing through the empty hallway like a gunshot. As she walked past Marcus's hiding place, he caught a glimpse of her face in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Her features, usually soft and maternal, appeared harsh and calculating. After both figures disappeared into the night, Marcus remained in his hiding place for several minutes, his mind reeling from what he had witnessed. 23 years of unwavering loyalty to the crown, and now he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the people he served. The weight of the knowledge sat heavy on his chest, making it difficult to breathe in the suddenly stifling air of the corridor. He completed his patrol on autopilot, his thoughts consumed by the conversation he had overheard. Sleep would not come easily that night, if at all. As dawn approached and his shift ended, Marcus walked to his small apartment in the staff quarters with the distinct feeling that his life, and possibly the life of the royal family, would never be the same again. The morning newspapers would arrive in a few hours, filled with their usual respectful coverage of royal events and charitable endeavors. But Marcus now knew there were stories that would never see print, secrets that were being carefully managed by people who claimed to serve the crown while serving their own interests instead. As he finally lay down in his narrow bed, still wearing his uniform because changing felt like too much effort, Marcus stared at the ceiling and wondered what his duty truly meant. Was it loyalty to the institution? Loyalty to the people who ran it? The question would torment him in the days to come, setting in motion a series of events that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. Part 2. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of routine duties and internal turmoil for Marcus Thompson. He went through the motions of his daily responsibilities, checking security protocols, coordinating with other guards, filing reports, but his mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying the conversation he had overheard. Every interaction with Lady Catherine or Lord Fitzwilliam felt charged with unspoken tension, though neither gave any indication they suspected his presence during their clandestine meeting. Marcus found himself studying their faces during the regular morning briefings, searching for signs of guilt or anxiety. Lady Catherine maintained her usual composed demeanor, efficiently discussing the day's schedule and security requirements with the same professional courtesy she had always displayed. Lord Fitzwilliam, however, seemed different. There were subtle changes, a slight tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights, and a tendency to avoid direct eye contact during conversations. On the third day, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. During his lunch break, he walked to the old storage room in the basement of the palace, a place he had discovered years ago during his early days as a guard. The room was filled with obsolete equipment and forgotten furniture, but more importantly, it housed the palace's old surveillance system, a network of audio recording devices that had been installed decades ago but supposedly deactivated when the modern security system was implemented. Marcus had always been mechanically inclined, a skill that had served him well in maintaining his personal equipment and occasionally helping with minor repairs around the palace. As he examined the dusty control panel, he realized that while the system was indeed inactive, It would not take much to restore functionality to select channels. The wiring was still intact, and the recording equipment, though outdated, appeared to be in working condition. Working with careful precision, Marcus identified the channel that corresponded to Lady Catherine's office. The technical manual, yellowed with age but still legible, provided the information he needed to reactivate that specific line. Within an hour, he had successfully restored the recording capability for that single room. His plan was simple. If another suspicious meeting occurred, he would have concrete evidence rather than just his word against two of the most trusted members of the royal household. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That very evening, as Marcus began his night patrol, he noticed the familiar glow of light emanating from Lady Catherine's office once again. This time, however, he was prepared. He made his way to the basement, activated the recording system, and settled in to monitor the conversation that was about to unfold. What he heard exceeded his worst fears. The conversation was not about the previous matter they had discussed. It was about something far more serious and immediate. Lady Catherine's voice carried a new urgency as she spoke to what Marcus assumed was Lord Fitzwilliam, though the audio quality made it difficult to be completely certain of the second speaker's identity. "The Queen has become suspicious," Lady Catherine was saying. She asked pointed questions about the charity fund allocations yesterday, and her tone suggested she knows more than she's letting on. "We need to accelerate our timeline." The second voice, strained with obvious panic, responded, "Accelerate? Catherine, we're talking about a lifetime of careful planning. You can't just rush these things. If we make a mistake now, everything will unravel. Everything will unravel anyway if we don't act decisively," Lady Catherine snapped. "I've worked too hard to build this network, invested too much time and energy to let it collapse because of royal curiosity. The Queen's trust has always been our greatest asset, but it could become our greatest liability if she starts digging deeper." Marcus felt sick as he listened to the cold calculation in her voice. This was not the woman who had warmly welcomed him during his early days at the palace, who had always inquired about his family and shown genuine interest in his well-being. This was someone else entirely, someone who viewed the Queen's trust as a tool to be manipulated, rather than an honor to be cherished. The conversation revealed layers of deception that went back years. Financial irregularities in royal charity funds, unauthorized agreements with media outlets, and most shocking of all, the systematic manipulation of the Queen's public schedule to create opportunities for private meetings that served personal rather than royal interests. Lady Catherine had been using her position to build a network of influence that extended far beyond the palace walls, leveraging royal connections for personal gain while maintaining the facade of devoted service. As the night progressed, more details emerged. Lord Fitzwilliam had been documenting everything, keeping detailed records of financial transactions and correspondence as insurance against potential exposure. However, these same records had become a liability, and Lady Catherine was pressuring him to destroy the evidence. The conversation revealed the location where these documents were stored: a safety deposit box in a bank downtown, accessible only to Lord Fitzwilliam. "I won't destroy 20 years of careful documentation," Lord Fitzwilliam protested. "Those records are our protection. Without them, we have no proof of who was involved and who gave what orders. If this comes to light, I won't be the only one taking the fall." Lady Catherine's response was chilling in its directness. "Those records are also our destruction. Every transaction, every forged signature, every unauthorized agreement, it's all evidence that could send us both to prison. The Queen's mercy only extends so far, and what we've done goes far beyond simple mistakes in judgment." The weight of what Marcus was hearing pressed down on him like a physical force. These were not minor infractions or simple errors in protocol. This was systematic corruption at the highest levels of the royal household. The very people entrusted with protecting the Queen's interests and reputation had been systematically betraying that trust for their own benefit. As the conversation continued, Marcus learned about the immediate crisis that had prompted this urgent meeting. An investigative journalist had been asking questions about charity fund allocations, specifically focusing on several large donations that had been redirected through shell companies before reaching their intended destinations. The journalist had obtained partial financial records and was apparently close to uncovering the full scope of the operation. Lady Catherine's plan was ruthless in its simplicity. They would frame the missing funds as a computer error, blame the discrepancies on outdated accounting software, and use their influence to discredit the journalist's investigation. Lord Fitzwilliam would play his part by providing false technical explanations for the accounting irregularities, while Lady Catherine would leverage her media contacts to suppress the story. "The beauty of our position," Lady Catherine explained with cold satisfaction, "is that no one suspects us. We are the trusted advisors, the loyal servants who have dedicated our lives to the crown. Our reputations are our shields, and as long as we maintain them, we are untouchable." But even as she spoke these confident words, there was an undertone of desperation in her voice. The investigation was closer than she wanted to admit, and the pressure was mounting. Lord Fitzwilliam's reluctance to destroy the evidence was creating additional stress, and cracks were beginning to show in their carefully constructed facade. The recording session lasted nearly 3 hours, during which Marcus documented everything he heard with meticulous detail. When the conversation finally ended and the participants left Lady Catherine's office, Marcus remained in the basement for a long time, staring at the tape recorder that now contained evidence of one of the most significant betrayals in recent royal history. As he finally made his way back to his patrol route, Marcus knew that he was no longer just a security guard doing his job. He had become the keeper of a secret that could destroy lives, end careers, and potentially shake public confidence in the royal family itself. The tape in his possession was more than just evidence. It was a weapon, and the question of how to use it would define not only his own future but the future of everyone involved. The palace around him seemed different now, its familiar corridors and ornate decorations taking on a sinister quality. Every shadow could hide another secret. Every closed door could conceal another betrayal. Marcus completed his patrol with mechanical precision, but his mind was already racing ahead to the morning when he would have to decide what to do with the knowledge and evidence he had gathered. Part 3. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the palace as Marcus sat in his small apartment, staring at the tape recorder on his kitchen table. The device seemed innocuous enough, a standard cassette recorder, probably older than some of the junior staff members, but it contained information that could topple careers and potentially damage the monarchy itself. He had not slept since returning from his shift, his mind churning with the implications of what he had recorded. Marcus had always been a methodical man, someone who thought through problems systematically before taking action. This situation, however, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The traditional chain of command offered no clear path forward. How could he report Lady Catherine's activities to her superiors when she was essentially reporting directly to the Queen herself? How could he trust that other members of the royal household were not also compromised? His first instinct was to take the evidence directly to Queen Isabella herself. As a man who had sworn an oath to protect and serve the royal family, his ultimate loyalty was to the crown, not to any individual member of the household staff. However, the complexity of the situation gave him pause. Lady Catherine had been the Queen's closest advisor for over 15 years, a trusted confidant who had helped navigate numerous political and personal crises. Would the Queen believe the word of a security guard over someone she considered almost family? Marcus spent the morning researching his options, using the small computer in his apartment to carefully investigate the proper protocols for reporting serious misconduct within the royal household. What he discovered was a labyrinthine system of procedures and hierarchies, most of which seemed designed to protect the institution rather than ensure accountability. Whistleblower protections existed in theory, but the practical reality was that anyone making serious accusations against senior staff members would face intense scrutiny and potential retaliation. As the day progressed, Marcus's internal conflict deepened. He found himself questioning not only what to do with the evidence, but whether he had any right to have obtained it in the first place. The recording had been made without the knowledge or consent of the participants, using equipment that was officially deactivated. While his motives had been pure, a desire to protect the royal family from potential harm, his methods were questionable at best. The afternoon brought an unexpected development that would force Marcus's hand. During the regular staff briefing, Lady Catherine announced that she would be taking a temporary leave of absence due to family obligations. She explained that her elderly mother had suffered a health crisis and required immediate care, necessitating her extended absence from royal duties. Lord Fitzwilliam would be temporarily assuming her responsibilities while also maintaining his own role as private secretary. To most of the assembled staff, this seemed like a reasonable and compassionate arrangement. Lady Catherine had always been devoted to her family, and her request for leave time was entirely within normal protocol. However, Marcus recognized this development for what it truly was, the beginning of an exit strategy. Lady Catherine was positioning herself to distance herself from the palace just as the investigation into the charity fund irregularities was intensifying. After the briefing, Marcus observed Lord Fitzwilliam closely. The man's nervousness had increased dramatically since Lady Catherine's announcement, and he appeared to be struggling with the additional pressure of covering for his co-conspirators' absence. During a brief conversation about security arrangements for the coming week, Marcus noticed that Lord Fitzwilliam's hands were visibly shaking, and he seemed to have difficulty concentrating on even simple questions. That evening, Marcus made his decision. Rather than taking the evidence directly to royal family members or senior palace officials, he would approach the situation from a different angle. Through his research, he had identified Detective Inspector Sarah Walsh, a Metropolitan Police officer who specialized in financial crimes and had experience with sensitive cases involving public figures. Inspector Walsh had a reputation for integrity and discretion, qualities that would be essential in handling such a delicate matter. Marcus requested a personal meeting with Inspector Walsh, using his security clearance to arrange an off-site encounter at a small cafe several miles from the palace. He chose his words carefully when making the appointment, indicating only that he had information relevant to an ongoing financial investigation, but providing no specifics over the telephone. The inspector agreed to meet him the following afternoon, during his time off from palace duties. The meeting with Inspector Walsh proved to be a turning point in Marcus's approach to the situation. The inspector was a sharp professional woman in her 40s who listened carefully to Marcus's initial explanation without judgment or immediate skepticism. When he described the circumstances that had led to his discovery of the suspicious activities, she asked pointed questions about his motivations and methods, but her tone remained neutral and encouraging. "What you're describing," Inspector Walsh said after Marcus had provided a general overview of the situation, "sounds like it could constitute serious financial fraud. If members of the royal household are indeed misappropriating charity funds, that would fall under our jurisdiction regardless of their positions or titles. No one is above the law, including those who serve the crown." Marcus felt a wave of relief at her words. For the first time since discovering the conspiracy, he was speaking with someone who understood both the legal implications and the delicate nature of the situation. Inspector Walsh explained that any investigation would need to be conducted with extraordinary care to protect both the integrity of the evidence and the reputation of the royal family as an institution. When Marcus finally produced the tape recording, Inspector Walsh's demeanor became more serious. She explained that while the content of the recording could provide valuable leads for a formal investigation, its admissibility as evidence would depend on numerous legal factors. More importantly, the very existence of the recording raised questions about privacy and surveillance that would need to be carefully addressed. "What I can tell you," Inspector Walsh said as the meeting concluded, "is that this information needs to be properly investigated through official channels. I'm going to need to consult with my superiors and possibly with the Crown Prosecution Service before we can proceed. This is not the kind of case that can be handled quietly or informally." As Marcus returned to the palace that evening, he felt both relieved and apprehensive. He had taken the crucial step of bringing the matter to the attention of law enforcement, but he was also acutely aware that he had set in motion a process that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The investigation would likely take months to complete, and during that time, he would need to continue working alongside the very people he had reported while maintaining the facade of normalcy. The next few weeks would test Marcus's resolve and discretion in ways he had never imagined. Lady Catherine's absence provided some relief from the immediate tension, but Lord Fitzwilliam's increasing anxiety created new challenges. The man was clearly struggling with the pressure of maintaining the deception alone, and his erratic behavior was beginning to attract attention from other staff members. Marcus found himself in the unique position of knowing more about the developing situation than anyone else in the palace, while simultaneously being unable to share that knowledge with his colleagues or superiors. The isolation was profound, and the weight of responsibility seemed to increase with each passing day. Every interaction with royal family members carried the additional burden of knowing about the betrayal being perpetrated by their trusted advisors. As the formal investigation began to take shape behind the scenes, Marcus prepared himself for what he knew would be a long and difficult process. The evidence he had provided would need to be corroborated through official channels, financial records would need to be subpoenaed and analyzed, and interviews would need to be conducted with numerous individuals who might have knowledge of the irregularities. The tape recording that had started everything sat locked in an evidence locker at the Metropolitan Police headquarters, its contents now part of an official criminal investigation. Marcus had done what he believed was right, but the ultimate consequences remained to be seen. The palace continued to function normally on the surface, but beneath that facade the foundations of trust that held the institution together were beginning to crumble. Part 4. 3 months had passed since Marcus first contacted Inspector Walsh, and the investigation had taken on a life of its own. What began as suspected financial irregularities had evolved into a comprehensive examination of royal household operations spanning nearly 2 decades. The Metropolitan Police had assembled a specialized team to handle the case, working in coordination with the Serious Fraud Office and maintaining strict confidentiality protocols to prevent premature media exposure. Marcus had found the waiting period to be almost unbearable. He continued his regular duties as a palace guard, but every day brought new challenges in maintaining his composure while watching Lord Fitzwilliam's increasingly erratic behavior. Lady Catherine's leave of absence had been extended twice, ostensibly due to her mother's continued health problems, but Marcus suspected she was using the time to distance herself from the palace before the investigation became public knowledge. Inspector Walsh contacted Marcus through their established secure communication channel, requesting an urgent meeting at their usual location. When they met that afternoon, her expression was grim but determined. "We've made significant progress," she began without preamble. "The financial analysis has confirmed your suspicions about the charity fund irregularities. We've identified systematic diversions totaling nearly £2 million over the past 8 years. The money was funneled through a network of shell companies before being redirected to personal accounts controlled by Lady Catherine and Lord Fitzwilliam." Marcus felt his stomach drop at the magnitude of the theft. £2 million was far more than he had imagined, representing funds that had been donated by well-meaning individuals and organizations specifically to support royal charitable initiatives. The betrayal was not just against the royal family, but against every person who had contributed to those causes believing their money would help others in need. Inspector Walsh continued with additional disturbing revelations. The investigation had uncovered evidence of document forgery, including falsified authorization signatures purporting to be from Queen Isabella herself. Lady Catherine had apparently developed considerable skill in replicating the Queen's signature, using this ability to authorize financial transactions that the Queen had never actually approved.
"But here's where things get complicated," Inspector Walsh said, her tone becoming even more serious.
"We've discovered that Lord Fitzwilliam has been documenting everything, just as you heard on the recording. He kept detailed records of every transaction, every forged document, every step of the operation. It appears he was building an insurance policy, probably planning to use the evidence to protect himself if the scheme was ever discovered. This revelation added a new dimension to an already complex situation. Lord Fitzwilliam was simultaneously a perpetrator and a potential key witness, someone who could provide crucial evidence to support the prosecution while also facing serious criminal charges himself. The investigators would need to carefully negotiate with him to secure his cooperation while ensuring that justice was served. The most shocking discovery, however, came when investigators examined Lady Catherine's recent activities during her supposed family leave. Rather than caring for an ailing mother as she had claimed, she had been systematically liquidating assets and making preparations to leave the country permanently. Financial records showed large cash withdrawals, the sale of property, and inquiries about overseas banking arrangements. "We believe she's planning to flee," Inspector Walsh explained. "Our surveillance indicates she's made contact with individuals who specialize in helping people disappear, and she's been researching countries that don't have extradition agreements with the United Kingdom. We need to move quickly before she has the opportunity to escape." The next phase of the investigation would require Marcus to play a more active role than he had anticipated. The police needed additional evidence to support arrest warrants, and Marcus was uniquely positioned to help gather that evidence due to his continued access to the palace and his knowledge of the participants' routines and habits. Inspector Walsh outlined a plan that would require careful coordination and precise timing. They needed to catch Lord Fitzwilliam in the act of either destroying evidence or attempting to warn Lady Catherine about the investigation. Marcus would be asked to monitor Fitzwilliam's activities closely and report any suspicious behavior that might indicate he was aware of the investigation. The plan was set in motion the following week. Marcus increased his patrol frequency in areas where Lord Fitzwilliam typically worked, and he began paying closer attention to the man's phone calls and computer usage. What he observed confirmed the investigators' suspicions about Fitzwilliam's growing awareness of the danger he faced. On Wednesday evening, Marcus noticed that Lord Fitzwilliam was working unusually late, remaining in his office well past his normal departure time. Using the restored surveillance equipment in the basement, Marcus was able to monitor the sounds coming from Fitzwilliam's office. What he heard was the unmistakable sound of papers being shredded, followed by the distinctive noise of computer files being deleted. Marcus immediately contacted Inspector Walsh, who mobilized her team for an emergency intervention. Within hours, search warrants were obtained and executed simultaneously at both Lord Fitzwilliam's palace office and his private residence. The timing was crucial. Investigators arrived just as Fitzwilliam was preparing to destroy the last of his documentary evidence. The arrest was conducted with remarkable discretion, considering the sensitive location and high-profile nature of the case. Lord Fitzwilliam was taken into custody during the early morning hours when the palace was largely empty, minimizing the risk of unwanted attention or media exposure. A carefully worded statement was prepared, explaining his absence as a sudden family emergency, buying time for the investigation to proceed without immediate public scrutiny. The evidence recovered during the search exceeded investigators' expectations. Despite his attempts to destroy incriminating documents, Lord Fitzwilliam had preserved extensive records in multiple locations, including a safety deposit box that he had apparently forgotten about in his panic to eliminate evidence. These documents provided a comprehensive roadmap of the entire operation, detailing not only financial transactions, but also the methods used to deceive royal family members and manipulate palace procedures. Lady Catherine's arrest proved more challenging. When police arrived at her stated address, they discovered she had vacated the property days earlier, leaving behind only basic furniture and no indication of her current whereabouts. The investigation had to expand to include an international manhunt, with authorities in several countries being alerted to watch for her attempted entry. The breakthrough in locating Lady Catherine came from an unexpected source. Her elderly mother, the supposed beneficiary of her compassionate leave, contacted the palace directly to inquire about her daughter's well-being. She had not seen or heard from Lady Catherine in months and was concerned about the conflicting stories she was receiving from various sources. This contact confirmed that the family emergency excuse was entirely fabricated, providing additional evidence of premeditated deception. Through international cooperation and financial tracking, authorities eventually located Lady Catherine in a small coastal town in Portugal, where she had been living under an assumed identity while attempting to access offshore bank accounts. Her arrest was coordinated through Interpol and European law enforcement agencies, ensuring she could be extradited back to Britain to face charges. As news of the arrest began to spread through the palace, Marcus found himself in an increasingly difficult position. While he could not reveal his role in initiating the investigation, he was often asked by colleagues about his observations and opinions regarding the shocking developments. The very people he had helped protect were now asking him questions that he could not fully answer without compromising the ongoing legal proceedings. The royal family's response to the crisis was swift and decisive. Queen Isabella issued a public statement expressing her profound disappointment and betrayal over the actions of individuals she had trusted implicitly. She emphasized her commitment to full cooperation with the investigation and her determination to ensure that such breaches of trust could never happen again. Behind the scenes, however, the impact on the royal household was devastating. Procedures that had been in place for decades needed to be completely overhauled. New safeguards had to be implemented, and the entire culture of trust that had characterized the institution for generations required fundamental reassessment. Marcus watched these developments unfold with a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. He had succeeded in protecting the royal family from ongoing deception, but the cost had been enormous. Careers had been destroyed, public confidence had been shaken, and the intimate family atmosphere that had made the palace a special place to work had been permanently altered. As the legal proceedings moved forward, Marcus knew that his own role in the affair would eventually become public knowledge. He prepared himself for the intense scrutiny that would accompany his testimony and the likelihood that his career at the palace would effectively end once his involvement was revealed. The sacrifice seemed worthwhile, however, when he considered the alternative, allowing the corruption to continue unchecked while the royal family remained unaware of the betrayal being perpetrated in their name. Part 5. The trial of Lady Catherine Blackwood and Lord Harrison Fitzwilliam became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in recent British history. The courtroom was packed daily with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public fascinated by the unprecedented breach of trust within the royal household. Marcus Thompson, once an anonymous palace guard, found himself thrust into the spotlight as the prosecution's key witness. The months leading up to the trial had been grueling for Marcus. His role in exposing the conspiracy had indeed become public knowledge during the pre-trial proceedings, and the media attention had been overwhelming. Photographers camped outside his modest apartment, reporters attempted to interview his neighbors and family members, and his every movement was scrutinized by a public hungry for details about the palace insider who had brought down two of the royal family's most trusted advisors. Marcus had been offered police protection during this period, but he declined, preferring to maintain as much normalcy as possible in his daily routine. He had, however, accepted the advice of legal counsel provided by the prosecution team, understanding that his testimony would be crucial to securing convictions and that he needed to be thoroughly prepared for the intense cross-examination he would face. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in March, with the courthouse surrounded by media vehicles and curious onlookers. As Marcus walked through the crowd to enter the building, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Less than a year ago, he had been a loyal palace guard with an unblemished record and no desire for public attention. Now he was about to testify in one of the most significant corruption cases in modern royal history. Lady Catherine's defense strategy quickly became apparent during opening arguments. Her legal team attempted to portray her as a devoted public servant who had been led astray by personal financial pressures and Lord Fitzwilliam's manipulative influence. They argued that she had intended to repay the misappropriated funds and that her actions, while wrong, were motivated by desperation rather than greed. Lord Fitzwilliam's defense took a different approach, attempting to paint him as a middle management bureaucrat who had simply followed orders from his superior without fully understanding the implications of his actions. His lawyers emphasized his cooperation with the investigation and his maintenance of detailed records that ultimately helped expose the full scope of the operation. When Marcus finally took the witness stand, the courtroom fell silent. Here was the man whose conscience and courage had unraveled years of carefully concealed corruption. The prosecutor led him through his testimony methodically, establishing his credibility and explaining the circumstances that had led to his discovery of the conspiracy. Marcus described the night he first overheard the suspicious conversation, his decision to reactivate the old recording equipment, and the gradual realization that he was witnessing systematic theft from royal charities. His testimony was detailed and precise, supported by the audio recording that was played for the jury, despite objections from defense attorneys about its admissibility. The cross-examination was intense and lengthy, with defense lawyers attempting to undermine Marcus's credibility by questioning his methods and motivations. They suggested that he had violated privacy laws by making the recordings, that he might have misinterpreted innocent conversations, and that he could have personal grudges against the defendants that influenced his actions. Marcus remained calm and consistent throughout the grueling questioning, sticking to the facts and avoiding speculation about the defendants' motivations. When asked directly why he had chosen to report the matter rather than confronting Lady Catherine and Lord Fitzwilliam directly, his answer was simple but powerful. "My oath was to protect and serve the royal family, not to protect individual members of the household staff who were betraying that trust." The prosecution's case was strengthened by extensive financial evidence, expert testimony about document forgery, and most damaging of all, Lord Fitzwilliam's own meticulously maintained records. Despite his attempts to destroy evidence, the recovered documents painted a clear picture of systematic theft and deception spanning nearly a decade. One of the most dramatic moments of the trial came when investigators revealed the full extent of Lady Catherine's preparations to flee the country. Evidence showed that she had not only liquidated personal assets, but had also attempted to access additional royal charity funds during her supposed family leave, indicating that she had planned to steal even more money before disappearing permanently. The revelation that Lady Catherine had been practicing Queen Isabella's signature for years, using it to authorize unauthorized transactions, sent shockwaves through the courtroom and the watching public. Handwriting experts testified about the sophistication of the forgeries, while palace officials described the devastating breach of trust that these actions represented. Queen Isabella herself provided written testimony describing her relationship with the defendants and her complete ignorance of their activities. Her statement, read aloud in court, expressed profound sadness over the betrayal of trust and emphasized her commitment to implementing new oversight procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. The defense team's closing arguments attempted to minimize their client's culpability by emphasizing their years of dedicated service and arguing for leniency based on their cooperation with the investigation. However, the prosecution's closing was devastating, methodically outlining the evidence of premeditated theft, systematic deception, and attempted escape from justice. After deliberating for 3 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all major charges against both defendants. Lady Catherine was convicted of fraud, forgery, and theft, totaling over £2 million. Lord Fitzwilliam was found guilty of similar charges, though the jury accepted some mitigation based on his cooperation with the investigation and the evidence that he had been keeping records as potential protection against his co-conspirator. The sentencing phase brought additional revelations about the broader impact of the defendant's actions. Victim impact statements from various charities described how the stolen funds had affected their ability to provide services to those in need. Representatives from organizations that had relied on royal patronage explained how the scandal had damaged their fundraising efforts and public credibility. Lady Catherine received a sentence of 8 years' imprisonment, with the judge emphasizing the severity of her betrayal of public trust and her attempts to flee justice. Lord Fitzwilliam was sentenced to 5 years, with his cooperation and documented evidence being considered as mitigating factors. As the trial concluded, Marcus found himself facing an uncertain future. His heroic actions had been vindicated by the convictions, but his career at the palace was effectively over. The royal household had implemented sweeping changes to personnel policies and security procedures, and while no fault was attributed to Marcus personally, His continued presence would serve as a constant reminder of the institution's vulnerability to internal threats. Queen Isabella personally thanked Marcus for his service and integrity during a private meeting at the palace. She emphasized that his actions had ultimately strengthened the monarchy by exposing and eliminating corruption that could have caused far greater damage if left uncovered. He offered him a generous settlement and outstanding references for future employment, acknowledging that his sacrifice had protected not just the royal family but the institution itself. Marcus accepted a position with a private security firm that specialized in protecting high-profile individuals and organizations. His experience and reputation for integrity made him highly sought after, and he found satisfaction in knowing that his new role would allow him to continue protecting people while avoiding the intense public scrutiny that had accompanied his involvement in the royal scandal. The trial's conclusion marked the end of one of the most significant corruption cases in modern British history, but its implications continued to reverberate through the royal household and British society. New transparency measures were implemented for royal charitable activities, financial oversight procedures were completely overhauled, and public awareness of the need for accountability in all institutions was significantly heightened. Years later, as Marcus reflected on the events that had transformed his life, he remained convinced that he had made the right choice. The decision to report the corruption had cost him his career and privacy, but it also protected an institution that millions of people respected and supported. The royal family had emerged from the crisis stronger and more accountable, and the public's trust, while initially shaken, had been restored through decisive action and transparent reforms. The tape recording that had started everything was eventually returned to the palace archives as a historical document, a reminder of the importance of vigilance and integrity in protecting democratic institutions. Marcus's story became a case study in whistleblower protection and ethical decision-making, inspiring others to speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing regardless of the personal costs involved. The evidence had indeed been clear, and justice had ultimately prevailed. But the price paid by all involved served as a sobering reminder that trust, once broken, requires considerable time and effort to rebuild. The royal household continued to function and serve the British people, but it did so with a renewed appreciation for the importance of transparency, accountability, and the courage of individuals willing to put principle above personal interest. Marcus Thompson returned to a quiet life away from the public eye, but his legacy lived on in the reforms his actions had sparked and the precedent his courage had established for future generations of public servants. The evidence is clear. Guard hands William a confidential tape of Camilla's late-night conversation.